Queer people have always been here. It ain't no new shit. It's not no, oh, it's 2024 and there's just more queers than ever. We always been here. Lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, two-spirited, queer, questioning, intersex, agender, and asexual people. Plus, because it's expansive. There's range, there's more. So before European colonization and the emergence of white dominant culture, we've existed. We've existed. So in this episode, we'll explore different components of radical queerness. There's different ways I believe that people live their queerness out loud, or maybe not so out loud. And that's due to their own reasonings. That I'm not here to judge for that, because the power portal, that's not what I'm doing. That's not what we doing. But as a radical queer person who really basks, that's a fun word to say, basks in radical queerness, that's what we're getting into today. That's what we're diving into the portal. And so in this episode, I'll talk about things that are rooted in pseudoscience and just different therapies that were meant to have gay people convert into conforming into society. I'll talk about the history and the evolution of the word queer, because I'm a history buff. And fun fact, I was a history minor. I was a history minor in college. So I love to geek out, but I won't go too deep, because obviously this is space for you to activate your thinking and do your own research if you want to tap in. I'll be talking about the power of the Stonewall Rebellion and how, while it did move us forward, right, and sparked activism, they weren't the first ones. And so it's really important to think about different actions and demonstrations and organizations that were precedent, right, before the Stonewall Rebellion in 1969. Then I began personal, because we got to get personal in the Power Portal. That's what we do. I'll be talking a little bit about my coming out journey, aka living in my truth, and then landing on my hope for the future of queer people, and not just people in future generations, but people who are living today, and ways that they can live authentically, because there's a lot of queer people, due to a lot of different things, are just not able to live in their truth and to live in a way that really expresses who they are. And there's a lot of hiding. And this episode is never to judge the people who have to do that and for their safety. However, it is thinking about what liberation can look like for everyone, because it does look different for everyone. So let me start. Let's take it way back. Let's take it back. Let's take it way back. Let's take it back to the 19th century, where a German psychiatrist really pioneered this concept of conversion therapy using a set of pseudoscientific techniques, which means it was not real, it was fake. Okay, this is not based off of real scientific evidence. But the idea of it was so that LGBTQ people would essentially abandon, give up their sexual desires towards the same sex. And they would conform to society's expectations of what their behavior should be. So an example of that. So it's like, okay, if there was a man and he had another man as his boyfriend, lover, partner, however they were identifying, okay, that is not the way you should behave as a man. This is what they thought. You should be with a woman. You should be a family man. You should take a wife and have a kid. You being a man and being with another man is not how you should behave. Society does not want that. That was the idea. So even though it's something that today there isn't any scientific medical, people who are like, yes, this is the way to go, it's still being practiced in a lot of different ways, i.e., if you go to the church and they tell you to not love who you want to love. Okay? Yeah. In many ways, it's being practiced today, even if it's not done through hypnosis. So there was so many different types that was included in this type of therapy. So yeah, there's hypnosis. There also was this concept and this belief that was like, okay, for gay men, the homosexuality disease lived within your testicles, so then they would remove your testicles. Wild. Wild. An offshoot of these pseudo scientific techniques was a term called aversion therapy. And this was based on, well, if we can get LGBTQ people to be utterly disgusted by their desires, they would no longer have those desires. So they would do things like give LGBTQ plus people chemicals that would literally make them regurgitate. That's a real fancy word for vomit. Whenever they looked at photos of their loved ones. And when by loved ones, I mean their lovers, their partners, their boos, their bays. Sometimes electrical shock therapy was used to the genital area as they put on gay pornography, right? Or wore clothes that didn't align with their gender. And why I want to start with these heinous, heinous practices, I want to start there, and I started there because it's an understanding of what European people, but what European people brought to this country specifically that really left a trail and residue, as they did with racism. They left a trail and residue of people to hate themselves, or people to, for queer people to hate themselves. And I'll get to the word queer and why I'm using that. But for people to hate themselves, for family members who would send their gay son to these types of conferences and camps to get these types of therapies, it taught families to hate their gay children and their queer children, right? It taught that society can do whatever the fuck they wanted, heinous practices included, to make you conform, to make you do what they wanted you to do. And so I start there because when you think about human rights, anyone, whether you think that being queer is right or wrong, I think a lot of us as humans, I want to assume that we would think that these are inhumane. Now let's get to the history of the word queer, which is why I used it. And the reason why I used it is because it has evolved. And I'll talk a little bit about that evolution because I think it's exciting to think about using a word that was used to essentially oppress people, shame people, get them to not want to be their full selves, and then to flip it. Flip it, just like how other communities have done. Flip a negative term and make it empowering. Can you think of that word of a community that you're in? A word that was used historically to oppress, but now you use it as empowerment. Think about that word. Smile when you think about that word because that's what we do, right? That's really alchemy, taking that pain and transmuting it into power. So let's get back into the history of the word queer. Yeah? Okay. So in the 1600s, also by a European person, this word was used, and there were a couple of synonyms for this. It was sexual perversion, it was seen as weakness, and there was an otherness. It was seen as crooked, it was seen as bad, it was seen as sinful, right? All of these types of things. And so when you think about the time that it took from the 1600s and it meaning all of those things, and then you bring it to the 70s and the 80s and the late 60s as well, because I'll get to the Stonewall Rebellion that happened in the last year of the 60s. Well, over time, these movements that were demanding rights for the LGBTQIA plus community were like, oh no, no more. I will love who I love out loud. out loud. And over time, the word queer, formerly negative, seen as negative, became an expansive umbrella term that's used to express gender and sexuality in a way that is expressive and expansive, right? I like those words when I'm talking about this because it doesn't conform to this tight binary of a box. It doesn't, it says, this is what it does, right? The word expansive and expressive. What it does is it shatters this idea that a woman is only supposed to be with a man. And by man, they mean cisgender, heterosexual man. It shatters that. It shatters, and now we're talking about gender, it shatters the idea that because a doctor assigned you to be a gender based off of your anatomy, that you don't have to identify with that. And that is a radical act. To say, no, doctor, you're wrong. You're wrong. I know you see this body part on me, but that's not who I am. Penis doesn't mean boy. Vagina doesn't mean girl, doc. It doesn't, doc. And that is so powerful, so expansive, expressive, because we have the freedom to express our gender and our sexuality the way that we want on our own terms. And we get to expand what all these definitions mean and make it fit for us. Juicy, so juicy, because heterosexual communities don't do that. So it is my belief that queer people are magic. That is my belief because to transmute a history, right? To take this ugly, heinous, painful, shameful history and say, oh, I'm powerful, baby. I'm here to take up space. That alchemy is magic. So the radical queer folks are operating in magic for real. And so I'll talk a little about that in my journey. But, when I first heard the word queer, I thought that was white people shit. I was like, I don't know what the hell a queer is because I'm from the hood. We just said gay. And then there were offensive terminology used for trans people. But oftentimes they too would fall under the category of gay. Now, I'm very educated to know that the definition of gay, literally, right, is a man who is sexually and romantically attracted to another man. Got it. But in the hood, gay was the umbrella term. Okay, it was no queer. Now, I have not been back to my old hood in a couple years. Maybe they're using queer, but growing up in the 90s in Brooklyn, that was not a term. It just was not. And even when I came back from college, queerness still felt like what the white people were doing back where I went to school in Massachusetts, but came back to the hood and they was using gay. I would go to quote unquote lesbian clubs and we would use lesbian and we use gay. But gay was really like the umbrella term. So I share that because I just appreciate how different communities are able to use words in ways that fit. So here it is. Cheers to being queer. Okay. Cheers to being queer. So I want to glide into the power of the Stonewall Rebellion. And there's so many different words and it's controversial because it's like riot, rebellion, uprising. Like, I like the word rebellion because there's a rebelling against the system of oppression. Once upon a time, which wasn't that long ago, okay, it was illegal in 49 states to be gay, to be part of the LGBTQIA plus community in that way. And so there was violence and there was discrimination. And people were arrested for not wearing gender appropriate clothing. Now let's bring it to 2024. Come. I know I took you back, bring you back. Time machine. I wish I had a time machine. Time machine. I'm bringing you back. We'll go back to the 60s, but right now we're going to come in 2024. Could you imagine being arrested for wearing clothes that doesn't align with your gender? So that means if you identify as a woman, what would you have been allowed to only dress as? And I say as because what does society say that women should dress as? If you identify as a man, then what would you have to wear back then? And think about what you wear today. Think about how you may go into a store and maybe you're not really thinking about if something is quote unquote men's clothes or something is quote unquote women's clothes, but we wear clothes. Imagine that. Think about like a baseball fitted. Think about that. Think about pants. Think about what the fuck is a gender appropriate outfit, really. And how gender appropriate clothing in that time was deemed as sexual deviance. But then I imagine how this is oppressive to everyone because what if you are a cisgender heterosexual person who, if you're a woman and you're like, I just want to wear my husband's sweatshirt, I just want to wear his tie. That was seen as a perversion. That was seen as something you can literally be arrested for. So I want us to think through this because they would count the number of clothing that identified with your gender. They would count the number of clothing that didn't identify with the gender that they saw you as. And it also was very rooted in what they saw you as. Okay, time machine activated. Let's go back to June 28th, 1969. Locked in? Strapped into the time portal? All right. June 28th, 1969, Stonewall. Now, in New York City, there were a lot of different places where queer people, trans people would party and turn up and meet each other and just celebrate life, right? Because in the midst of oppression, there's always an opportunity to dance and get a couple drinks. So they were like, enough is enough. I am tired of showing up with these overpriced, watered down drinks because exploitation. And every time I show up, the police are raiding the place. I'm over it. No more. They said, fuck out of here. They said, not today. On June 28th, they said, not today. So a rebellion ensued, right? Where queer and trans people fought back to this raid. They fought back to this police violence, to this discrimination. They fought back. And what the Stonewall Rebellion did was sparked activism for gay liberation. And people said, I'm no longer going to be quiet about my gender and my sexuality, but I'm also no longer going to be quiet about the way we're being unfairly treated, the way that we are being discriminated against, the way that we get violence enacted upon us simply for existing. They said, no more. And that opened the door to what today we know as pride parades that happen all throughout the month of June and through different other months because it's not only celebrated in June. And it makes space, right? And so for me, it's more about going to a parade because I haven't even went to those in years. It's more than a rainbow flag. It is about honoring the people who said, I'm not going to be quiet. I'm not going to conform, and get your motherfucking hands off of me, police. Not today. And when I think about the legacy of the Stonewall Rebellion, as with many other movements, there were other forms of political organizing and movements that happened before the Stonewall Rebellion. And I won't go deep. Do your own research if you want to think more about that and think about what happened before. But just two examples are the Society of Human Rights was formed in Chicago in 1924. And this was considered and known the first gay rights organization in America. 3 years before the Stonewall Rebellion that happened in New York, across the coast, right? In the West Coast, there were the Compton riots in 1966, right? And so a lot of these had trans folks, non-binary folks at the forefront, putting their lives on the line, saying, no more am I going to be quiet about this shit. This is not okay. And so I think about queerness as truly a reverence, radical queerness, as truly a reverence to those people. And every day I think about, how can I model myself, model, my thought, my processes after Sylvia Rivera, after Marsha P, right? And the many others that were a part of the liberation of gay and trans and non-binary people as we know it today. So let's bring it on down to a personal account of coming out, AKA living in my truth. So I knew that I specifically liked girls when I was a child. I just knew it. It was something that I was very aware of. I didn't like boys until I realized that that was what you were, quote unquote, supposed to be. And that was a way to conform. I didn't know. But my natural inclination as a little girl was to like other little girls. That was my natural inclination. And so a moment that sticks out to me is I was in an after school program, and the two adults at the time who were teachers in that program happened to look my way, and I was winking at a girl that I currently liked. And I'm gonna tell you right now, I was not the only girl in the class who liked girls. Okay. It was a few of us. It was a few of us. Okay. I'm thinking about like a couple of them, and I like their names are coming to my mind. Obviously, I ain't gonna say them. But a few of them are coming to mind. I'm gonna tell you right now, one was Indian and one was Puerto Rican. So yeah. So I knew what I liked, and I know I did like a little wink or whatever. And the teachers saw that, pulled me to the side, and tore me a new one. Now let me explain to you how they looked, and I won't go deep into like head to toe per se, but there were two of them. One was a woman who was masculine presenting. The other was a man who was feminine, who had very forefront feminine energy. And these two motherfuckers told me that if I winked at that girl again, they were going to call my mother. And I mean, the anger that they had, I was the type of person, I can say whatever, I'm going to say whatever I want to say at my house. But at school, I really wanted to impress my teachers. I really wanted to impress the adults in my life outside of my house. And so I really thrived on having good behavior. So them getting angry with me and then threatening to tell my mother what I did sounded like, oh, clearly I did something so bad. I did not know that it was bad. I genuinely did not know. I was just doing something that was natural to me. And they made it very clear that once again, that if I did it again, they would tell my mother. And that was the worst thing you could tell me. Okay. A Black mom. My mom is about 5 feet at her tallest. Okay. And as she getting older, she might even be 4'10" right now. But if anyone ever had a short Black Caribbean mother, you know that is probably one of the scariest things to think about, is them getting called because you were doing some shit at school you weren't supposed to do, even if it was after school. Oh no. Like, that was not a thing. That was not a thing that was allowed. And so I suppressed. And I continued to suppress. I suppressed in middle school and I suppressed in high school. But in 8th grade, there was this girl in my class, and she was very masculine presenting and just out loud with it. And she was so funny and cool, but also like, I was like, damn, in my head, I'm like, why you gotta look so gay? Why you gotta look so gay? But we were cool. We weren't close friends, but we were like secondary close friends. Like, I had my homies. We called each other the clique. And she wasn't in my clique, but she definitely was like someone who I definitely considered close. And so I would look at her and be like, girl, why you gotta be so out loud gay? Like, I'm not even gonna lie. I was like, geez. Now, fun fact, she then later became my second girlfriend when I was like 22. But at 13, I was so bothered, but I also was impressed that she was able to just be who she was. She knew she liked girls, she talked about it. And so I was outwardly bothered. I think I was like, girl, you want to put a dress on for prom or something like that? I think I might have said that. And then on the inside, I was like, wow, that's so cool. Like I didn't have a crush on her in that moment, but I like in eighth grade, but I definitely was like, wow, I am impressed and I admire that she is able to live in her truth. I really, really did. And so I then went to high school that ended up probably being the gayest high school in New York City. And I avoided all masculine presenting people. Now, at that point, I did have one particular crush. I don't think I had ones outside of this particular person, but I was so confused by it because I was like, oh, I don't want to be around her because everybody's gonna think that I'm gay. Cause that's also when I found out about gaydar. And so I thought that I was gonna walk down the hallway and it was gonna be beep, 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 beep. And so I was like, oh my goodness, I cannot hang around the gay girls. I can't think people I no, no. Now, what was interesting is that I was in the locker room one day and I overhear a few girls talking about Jewel is gay. Like I don't know if you knew this, but she's gay and da 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 da. And she's dating this girl. I froze. I don't think I breathed. And my back was turned. So luckily they couldn't see literally this frozen face. Like it was literally trauma. Fight, flight, freeze. I froze. I was like an ice cube. I was just frozen. And then they said who it was. Like they was talking about her in on the basketball team. I was like, oh, there was another girl named Jewel. Now go figure. How many Jewels do you think that there exist in the world? Okay. But it just so happened that the only other person named Jewel in my high school ended up being a gay girl on the basketball team. And I was like, why? So I avoided anyone who was openly queer all through my high school time there because I really, like I said, didn't want to be exposed. And I knew who I was. And I knew that it wasn't something I was allowed to be. So I suppressed. And I dated a whole lot of boys because I was like, do not be gay, 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 do not do it. So then I go to a woman's college. And my mom and my grandmother was like, why do you want to go to a woman's college? Like, and I was like, well, this is my story. Well, I want to go to a women's college because at women colleges, the people who graduate tend to all graduate with honors. I mean, the percentages are extremely high. And so you already know I'm going to excel there. And I will not be distracted by the boys. That sold them. Because I had so many boyfriends in high school. They was like, girl, okay, no distractions. Now, the reality was I knew that going to a women's college would make space for me to do those things, which was focus on my studies, but also live in a way that I could be fully myself. So I'm in college and I entered college, with the boyfriend. I got engaged to said boyfriend at the time. I dated dudes throughout college, but there was a lot of exploration with other women, college women. And so I was like, oh, I'm just bi, and I didn't always use the term. I was like, I'm fluid. I'm just not stuck to one thing. And so the different dudes I dated in college, they knew that. I was like, yeah, sometimes, I just do things with girls. And they were like, oh, okay, cool. And so there was this exploration. And so when I left college and in my like senior year, and as I'm like freshly out of college, I was like, all right, I'm bi. This is who I am. And around this time, I'm like, talking to who then, when I graduated college, became my first girlfriend. But I was like, damn, am I really bi? Is that really what I want to identify as? And so then I said, no, lesbian is actually it. And then I clung to that word, right? And so let me bring it on back a little bit. When I graduated college, I was 21. And a few months after I graduated, so I graduated in May, and in August, so 4 months later, I told my mom, and I was crying and I was struggling breathing, but I told her. And I know that that was hard for her. And I think that what was hard for her because I didn't tell her first. I told her friend. We were like at her friend slash spiritual advisor's house. And I told the spiritual advisor. And then I brought my mom into the room. And my mom was like, why do I need to hear this from, like, why did we have to do this here? You know, like, why did you tell her first and then tell me? And I was like, damn, why do people make it about that? It don't matter. Because the reality was I had already told my brother and my cousin. So what we gonna do now? I mean, my friends knew, like, it don't matter, but it was this self-centered way of like, why do I know last? Like, lady, this is what I'm telling you today. Okay. Um, and so I basked in the word lesbian, and I identified as a lesbian that was 21 up until, so that was about a solid 10 years I identified as that way. And I really clung to it because I knew the history of the word, and I know specifically how Black women who identified as lesbians really fought to really live in their truth with that word. However, what I didn't like was how, in many ways, it excluded trans women. I found that I would be in lesbian spaces and it really centered cisgender women. And so whenever trans women would be come up in conversation, it was like, there wasn't really an honoring and a respect that trans women were women. And I wasn't rocking with that. And so when I was in a relationship with a non-binary person, they were like, I'm really bothered that you use the word lesbian because I'm non-binary and I'm not a woman. And a lesbian means that a woman, is romantically and sexually attracted to another woman or the women. And I'm not that. Like, you're queer. And I was like, I'm not queer. Queer is white people shit. Queer also means that I be out here dating cis men because I found a lot of like cis men that I was around, especially around this time this conversation was being had, so around like 2016. I found that a lot of cis het men would be like, oh yeah, I love dating queer women. And they would kind of use it in this way, I felt, to like exploit queer women. And it just, I didn't like it. And so I was like, I don't like this shit. I'm starting to realize, okay, Black folks are using it, but I don't like the way Black men are using it. And I also really strongly do feel that it's white people shit. And so I don't really think this is something that, is for me. Now, once that relationship ended, I was able to kind of have a more expanded concept, right? And I was like, well, attractions of trans people, non-binary people, people who do not conform to gender norms was included in romantic, attraction and sexual attraction in those ways. And so I was like, But it wasn't really until I was braiding my homegirl's hair and we were talking about the word queer. And I remember being like, I don't want to use that word, da 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 da. And my friend said, well, you define it for yourself. Queerness doesn't have to mean that you secretly are using that word in like queer places, but then you just only exclusively are in relations with cishet men. Like, it doesn't mean that's not how you operate in your queerness. Queerness doesn't mean white people shit. Queerness can mean whatever you want it to be. And when she said that as I was braiding her hair, I was like, wow, I almost didn't want to charge her for that braiding session because I felt that she really unlocked something for me. And so I started to utilize the word queer as a lifestyle, as an orientation, as really a way of being. And then diving deeper into Black history, which is queer history included, and just finding out all of the ways and the roots and the morals and the values that really brought about, queer liberation. And so I was like, all right, I'm going to embrace this because this is who I am. And I love this for me. So I'm so grateful for my friend who really allowed me to open my mind and expand, my frame of mind and to really make queer fit me because that's what it is. And so, yeah, I embraced queerness and truly became free as fuck. And I would think about, all of the ways that I would not tolerate disrespect. thinking about, family members wanting to be like, oh, your little friend came by. I'm like, no, that's my partner. No, that's my girlfriend. No, like I was always correcting until I didn't need to anymore because people got it. I felt free as fuck. I felt free to choose relationships on my own terms instead of what and who people wanted me to be with. It's giving break every chain. I was breaking the chains. Listen, I was like, take these shackles off my feet so I can dance. And I just felt so liberated and feel so liberated as a queer person, as a free spirited, free thinker. I just was able to say, wow, you get to really have it define you. And when I think about just the history of queer people and all that they've done so that queer people can exist and thrive today, I am nothing but grateful. And I know that the work that I've done in this world thus far and that I will continue to do in my own ways, I will be breaking the chains that still exist so that future generations don't have to feel oppressed by it. But I also know, and now we're landing on the hope for the future of queer people. I also know that while radical queerness exists, it's not something that can exist for everybody. I also know that that's not a type of queerness that everybody may want to have in their lives. So, first and foremost, I believe in the autonomy of people to express their queerness in the ways that work for them. If you want to conform to society and do what is expected of you, I have nothing to say but good luck to you. It's not my ministry, but I really do believe that queer people get to thrive on their own terms. And I don't believe that you can say something like that and not make space for people to also want to conform. If you want to do that, boo boo. Because maybe people's ancestral assignment is to conform. Maybe people's ancestral assignment is to fit in. Maybe people's ancestral assignment is to shrink and be small. Right? But my hope for the future of queer people is that regardless of what your assignment is that you feel free within you and that you find and or curate spaces where you can be your free, full, authentic self, whatever that means, that you get to define it, that you get to do it on your terms, because queerness is not one size fits all. Queerness is not a monolith. So my hope is that if you made it to the end of this episode and you are a queer person listening, that you are able to find the freedom and the liberation within you, that you are able to find the elements that existed amongst the pioneers of the gay liberation movement, that you're able to find those elements and then do it in your own way. I truly hope that. I truly hope that, and I want to land here finally, as we finally land, I want to land here finally, is that my hope for queer people is that we are aware of the laws that are being posed, the bills that are being posed against us and our humanity, specifically for trans folks. And that we don't internalize that as knowing or believing that we are wrong. There is nothing wrong with us. And then my hope for society, based off of that hope for queer people to not internalize that bullshit, is that there are no more laws and bills passed to oppress queer and trans people, that we were able to live and exist freely because we deserve that. You deserve that. Thank you for tapping in. Thank you for listening to The Power Portal.